Welcome. It's an honor to speak, and I think people are going to be very interested in the conversation. We've spoken a number of times over the years, and had a lovely breakfast at your place in Israel, and it was wonderful to have that conversation.
Well, I came out of it and I said to my wife, Sarah, this guy really knows what he's talking about. I said, he's the Edison of our time, and I think I probably dealt you a sort of a backhanded slap, because what about the Tesla of our time?
Yeah, I think I got a long way to go before I anywhere near Tesla, I think. Yeah, it was a great conversation. We touched on a number of subjects, yeah. So, speaking of Israel,
speak of it.
There's as you saw some protesters outside, to be frank, probably got the most amount of negative pushback from people at Tesla about this interview than anything else I've ever done. If you could take a few moments to address,
Sure.
I think it's primarily the judicial reform question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good opportunity to tell people who are protesting, to at least so they know what they're protesting about, because I think many of them don't know, and there's a concerted effort to make sure they don't know. Look, the first thing I'd say is repeat what I just said a minute ago. Israel was, is, and will always be a robust democracy, but it's changed its I would say its character subtly and imperceptibly about 3 decades ago. And I'd say this all goes back to a very a very bitter day in Athens about 2,400 years ago.
Okay.
There's this, yeah, that's where it starts.
Okay.
I told you history has its roots. Well, there's this brilliant 28-year-old man who sees his beloved teacher forced to drink a cup of hemlock, Socrates. And he says, and it was forced by the Athenian Assembly, the democracy of Athens. And Plato says, and that's a 28-year-old man, he says, what is this crazy system, this democracy? There has to be a better thing. And the better thing, he says, is a utopia where the philosopher is king. You know who the philosopher is? It's Plato. It's Plato. Yeah. And he says, how will he govern? He'll govern with 300 guardians that he'll appoint, and they'll appoint their successors and so on. Now, this idea sort of ambled its way through the Middle Ages and was soundly rejected in modern times, first by John Locke and then Montesquieu, and then the fathers of the American Revolution. I mean, the curious thing was, Plato said you have to have elevated people, enlightened people to rule and not the masses, right? But then you had these brilliant people, yeah. Madison, Hamilton, all these guys, and they said, no, it's not the enlightened people. The people rule. It's we the people, not we the elites. We the people rule. But the way you rule and the way you balance in democracies, majority rule and individual rights, is a balance between the 3 branches of government. Okay? In Israel, that balance 30 years ago began to change. And we have the most activist judicial court on the planet. So it steadily arrogated to itself the powers of the legislature and the executive, where it basically decides. Democracy is supposed to be checks and balances of the 3 branches on each other. In Israel, the judiciary has no checks and no balances. It just has power. And so there's a request to try to bring it back into line, and that has been sort of boiling all the time. I came in, and there was a proposal put in, which I thought was bad, which is to reject one imbalance by creating another imbalance. If the court can rule against any decision made by the government or the parliament, then let's now correct it by having the parliament reject any decision with a simple majority that the court makes. I thought that's a mistake. It's moving the pendulum from one side to the other side. It has to be in a happy middle. I've been looking for that happy middle. I have a majority in the parliament, in the Knesset, to legislate anything, but I didn't. I held back because I want this to be a consensus. And so we made the minimal changes that would bring back a little of the balance that we had in Israel's first 50 years, and that's what we're trying to do now. I'm still reaching for a consensus. If I can't reach it with the other side of the political aisle, which becomes very difficult in today's democracies with the polarizing effect of social media, and big money and big data that is used to polarize even further, to arrange demonstrations anywhere on the planet. Then, if I can't do it with the other side of the aisle, then I want to do it with the public. That is to have as broad a consensus for a minor correction, basically some correction on how we choose judges, because otherwise we have, basically 15, in many ways, unelected officials. By the way, I think gifted people, good people, but they replace the government. They're sort of unelected, and they decide everything. That's not exactly democracy. So we're trying to get Israel back to where it was before. I hope we succeed. I can tell you that as soon as I get back to Israel after this week, that's what I'm going to focus my attention on. I hope we succeed. But it's not, I'm described as something between, I don't know, Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan. Elon, you read a lot of books. I read the Federalist Papers a couple of times, I'm versed in the theories of democracy and the balance between the three branches of government. That's what I'm trying to achieve, nothing more. And it's not an easy thing to be maligned. I know you've never seen that, right?
No,
you've never
I have no idea what
that,
you're talking
right?
about. Yeah, no, me maligned, never. Yeah, no, I guess, and we don't want to spend obviously too much time on the subject since this is primarily about AI sort of existential risk. But and it's difficult for people here to know exactly how other systems work. But certainly the press in the U.S. has not portrayed the reforms you mentioned in a positive light.
Well, especially the New York Times. I mean, they're in a fantastic obsessive campaign, but they usually get it wrong, so it's not important.
So, I mean, in the U.S., like the courts cannot really produce new laws, but they can
Nullify.
Provided it's against the Constitution.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Well, in Israel, we don't. In Israel, we supposedly have basic laws that constitute a constitution. Now the debate in Israel is whether the court can actually change the basic laws. And it's a big debate. I don't want to get into that and get people into this, but there's always a balance. You know the way you balance the power of the people, the majority, with the court in America is that the politicians choose the judges. Okay, that's something that creates constant tension, obviously, including today. But that's built into democracy. There's tension between the various branches of government. You have to resolve to make sure that you're somewhere in the middle and not in one of the extremes. And that's what I hope I can achieve in Israel. So that's, and I think it'll come out. People will see that Israel was a democracy and will be, in my opinion, a stronger democracy after the dust settles.
Sounds good.
It's easier than AI.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, great. I guess back to AI. Is this the appropriate time to bring the other people on?
Only after you answer one of my questions I wanted to ask you. I want to ask you two questions.
Okay.
First one is, who's the person that most influenced you?
Well, I've been influenced by a lot of people. I've read a lot of books. I'm somewhat of a voracious reader of books. I would say probably Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy would be the single most influential book, which is really a book on philosophy disguised as humor. So that'll probably be my number one. I mean, I think Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite books as well. Asimov, the Foundation series was actually helped inspire me to try to make life multiplanetary, because I think that improves the probable lifespan of civilization. What about you?
Well, the person who most influenced me was my father, who was a great historian.
Yeah.
And he was also the editor. You might find this interesting because you read encyclopedias. He was the editor-in-chief of the Hebrew Encyclopedia. So he was sort of a polymath. But I once asked him when I decided to run for the prime minister, and this is a few decades ago, because I've been reelected 6 times. So I asked him, Father, what is, the most essential quality that you need to be the prime minister of Israel? And he said to me, well, what do you think? And I said, well, you have to have a vision, and you have to have the resolve and flexibility to achieve it. And he said, well, you need that for anything. And I said, so what is the most essential thing? And he said a word that surprised me. He said, education. You have to have a broad and deep education, otherwise you'll be at the mercy of your clerks. Otherwise you won't navigate the course that you want to reach. You'll be navigated to the course they want to reach. And I found that to be actually very sound advice that I find hard to maintain, but I read also all the time to increase the intellectual capital and not deplete it. And I think that also makes life more interesting, as I'm sure you do. We both, I think you read more books than I have, but I try to read a lot.
Yeah, well, I think that generally would be good advice for kids or adults, frankly, is just to read more.
Who reads today? Do people read?
I know. And unfortunately, I think reading has taken somewhat of a hit.
That's because people read tweets. That's what they do.
Well, they watch TikTok videos live, which it's not, you learn something, I suppose, but there's much less reading. And the things that I think if I'd had the internet back then with the great movies, video games, and that kind of thing, I would have read much less than I did. I kind of read the encyclopedia out of desperation because I didn't have anything else to read.
You read the whole encyclopedia?
Yeah, pretty. I'd get something that I'm not that interested in, and I'll skip past it. So, but yeah, pretty much.
That's desperation.
Well, it's desperation. No, it's just like I'm running out of books.
Well,
so,
but I think it was probably a better encyclopedia than the one these digital encyclopedias today, which are unfortunately are edited in ways that are not, that don't necessarily bring out, the balanced views of things.
Yeah, I mean, the fun thing about, say, like Wikipedia is, like there's an old saying, like history is written by the victors. It's like, well, yes, but not if your enemies are still alive and have a lot of time on their hands to edit Wikipedia.
History is written by the people who can harness the most editors.
Yeah, I mean, the loser has just got a lot of time on their hands, and so what are they going to do? Edit Wikipedia, and literally. So, yeah. Well, should we perhaps bring?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Let's bring it in.
Oh, we're going to take a break. Okay. Okay, so it sounds like we're gonna wrap up this, and then take a break, and then we'll add Max Tegmark and Greg Brockman. Is there any last words you'd like to say for just the two of us?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to pick your brain on something that is so important for the future of my country and the future of the world. And I really think that we don't have much time. We don't have much time.
Yeah. Well, one of the things maybe we'll do it another time, but I went to Hebrew preschool, and I can sing a pretty good Hava Nagila, so maybe I'm going to have a sing-off at some point, but I don't know if we have time today, but...
and if you want to, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you.
Well, we need some music.
This is where we go into the deep fake. We could have the Elon Musk Hava Nagila.
All right. Well, I guess we'll take a break now. Maybe kick it off with some Hava Nagila in the next session or something.
Terrific. Thank you.